Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot.
And I'm Bill Ryan, and this is Sunday the 26th of July 2009, have I got that right? And I personally want to say that I'm delighted to be here with Stephen Greer.
Oh, good, nice to meet you.
Of all the people who we get emails asking us to interview, you are number one on quite a long list.
Oh, wow.
And the reason for that is because a lot of people see Project Camelot as continuing to kick the ball that was kicked off by the Disclosure Project back in 1993. And you started something that we're doing our best to support you with in terms of bringing the truth to the world.
Oh, good,
so
thank you.
We want to thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
So we have some questions for you, but they might not be the most comfortable of questions.
Oh, I can take any questions.
Okay. And we've heard that you're not a wilting violet, as they call it, or whatever. So what we're wondering here, because we have different philosophies, I think,
Right.
and different approaches, and I think that's really interesting. I know that we started out maybe at the same place in terms of we're taking witness testimony, and certainly you did, and that tactic was very effective and has stimulated us to go down the road we went on. And we've been doing this for a little over 3 years now. And I just wondered if you have a philosophy that you feel like, or a trajectory that brought you from witness testimony to free energy, and if you could talk a little bit about that road.
Well, obviously the Disclosure Project involves many elements. One is the disclosure of the fact that we're not alone. The other is that there are highly classified projects that have been run illegally for about over 50 years dealing with this. And number three, you cannot say that this has been kept secret and it's real without giving the raison d'etre. Why would something like this be kept secret? Now, in the early days, it could be argued that, well, there were religious issues, that the people would panic at the idea that there was life in outer space, or that there were theological objections. And in fact, these still exist. I had a senior Jet Propulsion Laboratory scientist say the reason that some of the information about the ancient structures on Mars has been withheld is that it would, quote, collapse the foundations of all orthodox religions in the world, to which I said, great. I mean, it's time people who think the world's 6,000 years old and we rode dinosaurs bareback need to get a life.
Yeah.
But okay, so that was one area. But the largest one, and this is when everything went deep black in October 1954, I mean, we know it to the day, was because they had actually figured out and mastered the electromagnetic-gravitic propulsion systems. So that was 55 years ago.
Right.
Because, 55 years ago, there was the ability to master those sort of technologies. And obviously, when the Rockefeller Commission that reorganized the Department of Defense and the CIA was put together by Eisenhower, what they did was reorganize it in a way so that these sort of issues were handled under work for other programs and aerospace contracting entities and high-tech entities, and really took it out of the oversight of the President and the Congress. And that's when it all went south, and has been that way ever since.
Right.
So, and the reason for that is because if you acknowledge that the UFOs are real, the very next thing that any bona fide scientist or policy analyst is going to ask is, well, how in the hell are they getting from one star system to another? And when that question is asked, it will be answered, because we have people on our team who can answer it in great detail.
Yeah, they're not
and when that is, and then when that is answered, I'm trying to finish one thought here.
Sure.
When that is answered, you are going to then see the end of oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, all of it. That's a $500 trillion asset base that they're sitting on and protecting. 200 or 300 people and corporations in the world control half the wealth of the planet, the net worth of the planet. So the secrecy has to be understood within a larger macroeconomic geopolitical crisis where there's been accretion of enormous power in the hands of relatively few people. And this has gotten worse, not better, since the Gilded Age of the Industrial Revolution's dawn. It's actually worse now than it was in the time of Cornelius Vanderbilt and the Rockefellers. It's worse now than it was. So that, I think, is, and so our focus, as we've learned more and more about the reasons for the secrecy and the kinds of technologies that are extant, is that we have concluded that it's very, very important to be able to bring out those energy systems, at least what I call the level 1 systems, the ones that you could put on a box over here or something on the size of a coffee table, and I've seen these. Now, I've, of course, seeing them and being able to bring them out and having people release them is another matter, but I've seen them, and they extract energy from, some would call it the 0 point energy field, some would call it the quantum vacuum flux field, whatever you want to call it, but in the fabric of space-time around us, there's an enormous electromagnetic potential that can be touched into and brought out. And that is one of the practical implications of disclosure. I mean, there are many implications.
So
one is informational, one is diplomatic contact, and one is the issue about science and technology, which could transform the planet, get us off of oil, stop global warming, end the crisis of the have and the have-nots and the poverty in the world. So that, I think, resonates with many people. There are a certain number of people who are interested in extraterrestrial life. There's a much larger number of people who are concerned about the environment, the energy crisis, the poverty in the world, etc.
So what you're saying is what you're saying, that what you were propelled towards is the latter? I mean, is that really, because I know your emphasis is now really free energy.
No, it isn't. No,
or it seems to be. Maybe I misunderstand.
You need to not state my priorities, and let me be very clear on this. We have 3 programs going on with equal bore simultaneously.
Oh, really? Okay.
Number 1 is CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is an interplanetary, interstellar diplomatic initiative. That was the founding entity, and it's still the primary focus. Okay. The second is Disclosure Project. That started as Project Starlight when I was briefing the CIA director and the Clintons and all these people, and then evolved into the Disclosure Project when Clinton said, I won't do it because I'll end up like Jack Kennedy. And the Congress people that we met with said, this is too big a fish for us to reel in. We're not going to do it. So it kind of devolved onto our shoulders. And then that's why we did in 2001, to correct the date, the National Press Conference event and the Disclosure Project. And that still continues. We still continue to do that. And then the third is the OrionProject.org, and the focus on trying to identify people who have an understanding of these new physics and sciences so we can bring out some of the practical applications. So those 3 things are going on with Equal Bore. We have teams of people working on all of them. I'm sort of the coordinator or head of those 3 projects, but they're interrelated, and they're actually 3 sides of a pyramid, or whatever, not pyramid, but 3 sides of one entity. And 3 facets that are interlocking.
I'm sorry, I had a misunderstanding.
No, it's good that you brought it up, because many people do have that.
Yeah, we get a newsletter, the Orion Project,
right,
or how you refer to it, newsletter comes into my inbox, and it is, exclusively talking about sort of more the free energy side of things, right. And so, it's a misconception, but is out there. And, as you say, I mean, it's very interesting to hear that you're continuing these other...
and people have to understand that, people say, well, what about disclosure? I said, we have the testimony of 110 of these military witnesses out there. Mm-hmm. We have DVDs and other materials and books out there with thousands of pages of government documents. We have put the dispositive proof and testimony out there, and that then has launched a worldwide disclosure movement in many, many countries, as you know. At this point, when we started that endeavor, it was 30 or 40% of the public thought these were real. Now it's 80%. Some countries, in polls that they did recently here in Spain, it was 90-some%. Think that we're not alone and ETs are real. So we feel that the big overarching strategy of establishing that fact has happened. What has not happened is, at least within America, an official acknowledgement of the issue and the ending of the secrecy. But this is due to a complex problem that I work on behind the scenes, because that's where the problem is. The problem is within Majestic. And the problem is within conventional political leaders and the military-industrial complex. And when we started this effort, I had about a third of this Majestic group who thought what we were doing was something they would support. Now it's 70%. Now the other 30% would probably like to see me dead. But the point is, and they're vicious, but there's 70% of them now who really are lining up, and this includes the elements within Majestic that are in Europe, that are within the Masonics, that are within a lot of secret organizations that are fed up with the secrecy and know that we're at the end of how far we can take this silly game of secrecy and secret power. And so a lot of what the work that I've been doing, and it has directly to do with disclosure, has to do with trying to fix that highly dysfunctional dynamic, which cannot be ignored. You cannot pretend like those lions aren't out lurking in the jungle. You don't have to capitulate, but you have to try to educate them and give them another vision. And one thing I say to the people is that people who are addicted to secret power, Kissinger once said, power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. Yeah. That then the secret power would be that on steroids and Viagra and every other thing, and quite blunt. And so one of the real issues becomes what can you can't just take away, you have to give. And so here my job is to try to also give some of these leaders, and both conventional leaders and people who are within these classified projects, a new vision. A vision that can guide the world out of its current direction into a path of peace, safety, justice, free energy, and a whole new transformation of our civilization on this planet very quickly, because we've run out of time, in my opinion. I don't think we have another 50 or 100 years to fritter away.
Well, as it happens, neither do they. I mean, what we get from our secret witnesses and from people that are, exposed to the Illuminati philosophy constantly is that our time is running out in terms of, like, we just heard from a secret witness, and I'm running this by you to hear whether this coincides with what you know, that there is around 10 months left of food before it runs out on the planet, and that there's another 3 to 4 years worth of oxygen. I mean, I don't know if this is, down to the minute or not, or whether this is it's more vague than it was stated to me, or more in, where you would fall in that category in terms of how you understand that.
Let me say that there are a lot of my father-in-law used to famously say, paper does not refuse ink. And in the modern era, the computer screen does not refuse digits. So in other words, anything can be said. Now, one has to, my own assessment of that is that there are competing interests that try to use whatever access they have to provide a certain paradigm that is highly eschatological. The eschatological axis within Majestic is a very powerful one. And when I remember meeting with a member of a royal family in Europe back in the 90s, and his entire purpose in providing funding to abduction researchers was to, and I know who they are, all the mainline ones, was so that they would put the information out to the public so that the public would learn to hate enough of the aliens so that we could have an interplanetary war, which would be the Armageddon, that would precipitate the return of Christ. Now, this was a very specific, Opus Dei perspective, and that is really what is driving. It's like Ahmadinejad in Iran saying that, well, it'd be okay if we went to nuclear war with Israel, because that would force the 12th Imam, which is their return of their Christ, to return to Iran.
Sure.
And so this eschatological end of the world perspective.
So you're actually saying, just to cut to the chase here, you're saying that this man's testimony to what I just said about 10 months and 4 years is basically him being programmed by the controllers in a certain sense.
Well, it's through a glass dimly. In other words, yes, we're headed for a crisis. Yes, we're headed towards a hiatus, can I call it that, in the situation. But what they don't understand is that it is the end of one era and the opening of another. It isn't the end of life on Earth. It is not going to be the end of the human race on this planet.
Well,
These
we
are all.
certainly
This
agree
is
with that.
this is and so the conflation of certain misinterpreted spiritual traditions, whether it's from the Book of Revelations or elsewhere, or the Mayan calendar in 2012, has created this sort of eschatological juggernaut,
Sure.
which is very Scientological. It's very majestic, and it has a lot of underpinnings within the philosophy of why the secrecy has continued on like it is. This is one major axis of why the secrecy has continued. The other one is the technological and money and control and macroeconomic control of the planet.
Yeah.
My point to people is that, for example, now I've been doing this for 19 years, and I've had, you know, if you brief the CIA director, you've had some good access, and that was
Sure.
16 years ago. And my family put the first man on the moon. So I have had access to people within classified projects for a lot of my life. And for example, and I know that we're going to probably disagree on this because I saw what you wrote on your blog after my talk last night. There are people who have been exposed to what they wanted them to see. This Bob Lazar was one that they then allow to speak out. Now the question is, what's the agenda behind that allowing? I have had more than a dozen people who have worked in facilities in Dulce and in Pine Gap in Australia, and other places where they have actually been growing the gray and reptilian species that people think are ETs. And that the people who've been in the projects think they're working alongside an alien. And they're not. They're absolutely what are called nanobiomachines. And they are programmed life forms. And there is no question that that is going on. And so the larger question becomes, if someone comes up to you with just an empirical observation, what is it they're seeing? Now I'm going to cross over into something even more controversial. We have some people at Lockheed and another program, I can't say where it is, but it's in the South, in an underground facility, and the chief scientist is someone I know very well. And they have developed electromagnetic systems where they can put someone into a state and they can go into, and this gets into a cosmological complex discussion now, a lower astral or denser astral field. And some would call this demonic. And they can actually see beings and creatures there and bring them in three-dimensional and materialize in flesh and blood through these electronics. So a lot of these things that people are seeing have nothing to do with interstellar and extraterrestrial. So when I talk about the interstellar civilizations that also have transdimensional capability. You can't go through interstellar space at the speed of light or less.
Right.
But there's a cosmological indigestion happening within ufology and disclosure that I find disturbing, because people are conflating interdimensional with extraterrestrial with PLFs that are programmed life forms, man-made, and all of this is being put together as if it is one thing, and it isn't. It's unfortunately much more complex than this, and this is exactly why.
I agree with that as well. It's very complex.
This is why when Martin Cannon, back in the late 80s, put together a 2,000 footnoted paper and collection proving the military human involvement with abductions, and that the creatures they were using were not ET. There wasn't some alliance between Majestic and these ETs. The ETs wouldn't bother with them. Now I say they're aliens, but they're not extraterrestrials. Okay, and now we're getting into, and people say I'm being cheeky. I'm not, because these are very bizarre creatures, and some of them even, now I'm going to take it one step further. You've all heard of Roswell. And you've all heard of that there have been a number of electromagnetic weapon systems that have targeted and knocked down interstellar vehicles. Not at a great kill rate in the early days. I hate to use the word kill rate, it's terrible, but it's become more and more efficient since SDI and since the 90s. frankly, and particularly in the last 5 or 10 years. What happened, however, in the early days, they had enough crude stuff. Of course, we had things like the Philadelphia experiment, which did not happen in Philadelphia, happened in Rhode Island. That was the cover story. That's another whole discussion. But that was in the 40s. And so there were very advanced electronics that were already being used. And by the time the extraterrestrials showed up when we were detonating nuclear weapons, we were able, at Roswell, at our only nuclear bomb squadron, to have one of these weapons in a radar dome or configuration that caused the two of those to crash.
Right.
There were bodies on that. Some of them were living. And I have a witness who actually handled one of the living ones as late as 1950, 51, here in Virginia, not far from where I live, at Camp Perry, Pearry, very top secret facility. Now, what's interesting is that genetic material from some of those bodies have subsequently been cloned from a number of different species. Now, you know, I have a daughter with a PhD in neuroscience and genetics from the most prestigious university in the world. And what I've done is I've looked at this sort of what the current state of the art of science is in the non-classified world, is that if they wish to, they could take cells from a human and clone them. Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now,
We
imagine what
understand
has
that.
existed within the classified world, because these are the people who were these were the humans who were the spiritual descendants of Mengele and the Nazis, and Werner von Braun, and that whole
You're talking
set.
about the scientists.
The scientists who were brought into these classified projects and who were at the foundation of the CIA and the early space program. And so the highly compartmented programs that deal with this issue have, and this is the thing, everyone talks about the anti-gravity and this and that. What they forget are the enormous advances that have happened between the early 40s and now in genetics and bioengineering and neuroscience.
Well,
and those have gone into application where they now have created these creatures that people think, oh, that's an extraterrestrial. I said, it is not an extraterrestrial. So the whole thing is deliberately become confused so that people will make an assessment that there are the good aliens and the bad aliens. And if we step into that cowboys and Indian mindset, they can then divide the human race into another war footing that will fulfill the majestic plan that was hatched in the 50s, that will take us, as Douglas MacArthur said in his last address to the Congress, to interplanetary war, and that which is the World War III they want. So most of retail ufology, I would say 90+% of it, has embedded within it this message and this information and these images for the purpose of majestic. Now, I think people do it completely innocently. Because
I want to ask a direct question here, because this is personal, and I haven't said this on camera before, so here we go. I'm an abductee, and I'm a mountaineer, and I was abducted out of my tent in December 1981 in the Himalayas on the slopes of Makalu, which is in Nepal, on the border of Tibet. And that wasn't done by the military. This was done in December, in winter in the Himalayas, and I was taken out of my tent, floated over the glacier in the middle of the night, and it was minus 40 degrees. This wasn't the military who were doing that. They couldn't do that.
Well, I'm not saying all contact has been military. I'm being very specific. I'm saying that there's enough. Let's look. If you have a nugget of gold and you dump a whole bunch of fool's gold on it, then no one's doing an assay. And the question becomes, what part of it is extraterrestrial? What part of it is interdimensional?
Exactly.
What part of it is man-made? And what part of it is some mixed up where people, and here I'll make it a little more complicated. There are people who've had ET contact, and when these classified projects find out about it, they will then target them for an abduction so that their paradigm and their perception of this will become confused.
Okay, but I think what happens here is that we are aware of this level that you're talking about. We're aware of all these different dimensions because we basically dimensions of this argument because we have been exposed to these levels by different secret witnesses, okay? And I think if we have a disagreement, what it is I don't know if it's completely, it's not an either or question. It's a how much. It's a percentage, as you say. It's going to be is there sometime abductions that are ET related, that are real ET related, okay, and handled by a certain group of ETs? Is there a MyLab element to it, and is that maybe the largest portion? Highly probable, okay? But is it exclusively that there are only good ETs? I think that when you extrapolate that, that's where I have a problem, because
Well, I think the problem is
that's
with the
philosophically
caricature of
a problem,
the
a limited way of looking at reality.
No, I think the problem is a Manichaean view that has to divide entire species into good and bad. This is precisely what Hitler did when he would say, the Jews are bad and they're dirty and they're this. I think we have to be extremely careful.
Well, I don't think it's necessary to do that quite so much as it is in terms of the overall. I mean, we're talking universes. Okay, we're talking multiple species out there that go, beyond this solar system, certainly, and we're talking about life in general.
But the point is,
I don't think that we can sit here and make a statement like what I heard you say on stage yesterday, which was there are no bad ETs.
No, I think you can say that there is no evidence that the planet has been invaded by hostile, is the word I used, civilizations
so far
that have an intent.
That you have not, in other words,
you can't prove a negative. This is axiomatic.
Well,
what I can
so we have a problem.
You can't prove a negative.
In other words, that's the point.
But it is the point. You can't prove a negative, but what you can do is go with the evidence that you do have. And one of the sets of evidence we have through CSETI, which has gone around the world and made contact all over the world with thousands of people, we have never had a harmful event happen. We have never had anything resembling anything that has frightened or harmed anyone on the contact team. On the other hand, we have had members of our team that have been targeted with these psychotronic related military type abduction events, including myself.
Right,
and so what I have to go with is the evidence that I have, and I also know that there's the stagecraft, to use an Institute for Strategic Studies document that I have, that talks about the stagecraft of abductions because of its psychological warfare value to the agenda of an us versus them Manichaean worldview that would redound to the benefit of the military-industrial complex. So this is very circular. And I think that what I'm saying is one has to be very careful if you're going to be involved with disclosure and contact and saying this group is bad, this group is good and we're bad, and we're slipping right back into the Israelis versus the Palestinians, the Jews versus the Christians, the Muslims versus the whatever.
Okay, but this is not where we're going.
But if you say that there are bad aliens that are working with a secret government.
The language is actually service to others versus service to self, and that in itself is also a matter of degree.
But you
so
can't
it's not
make that
really
judgment.
good.
See, here's the problem.
Well, none of us can. That's the whole point.
Well, that's my whole point. And I think before one starts going down the path of the sky is falling, and we start unleashing this Manichaean worldview of here are the ones that are service to others and here's the ones that are selfish, I would say that there's some enlightened self-interest everywhere. And let's back this up just a little further. Let's say that these civilizations...
Especially by the invaders.
By the who?
If there's an invasion race, then enlightened self-interest is going to be the predominant model by which they're going to operate, right?
And you're entitled to that. I'm positing.
All I'm doing here, until it actually happens in black and white.
Who has been invaded? And
there is evidence. In other words, you can get evidence on both sides of the question.
Well, but to characterize it as an invasion, what if there is an interstellar group that have different ones of them have different functions? For example, I'm going to take this a little further. There's one group that has a very specific function. You might call this the Noah's Ark function. that this planet is under tremendous environmental stress. We're losing thousands of species and plants and animals.
Yep.
I've spoken with people about the landing in Provence of this ET craft in a lavender field, and there were these little ETs out picking lavender, and it sounds hilarious.
Just like
what were they doing?
Just like the movie.
Absolutely happened, and it left physical trace. Could there be a human genome project that's trying to protect the human genome and a genome project for Gaia, the Earth? Could there be? There could be all kinds of things going on that are beyond our ability to say, that's happening by people who are selfish and invaders, and that's happening by people who are the good ones.
Yes.
And I think that sort of dichotomy and dualism that I read on your blog is the exact script that Majestic would want people to buy into to support interplanetary war. And I think that there is another...
I think a paranoia over interplanetary war per se, and that scenario, is laudable. Okay, in a certain way, we understand that you're coming from a heartfelt perspective when you talk about let's not get caught up in polarities, okay? But what we don't want to do is analyze this scene, this scenario, and the realities that are out there, and say we've come to definitive statement where we can say there are only good ETs. Now let me tell you why that's dangerous as well. Because what that does is leave people, humans, and humanity possibly in general, in a vulnerable position, because they are then going around following ET like the Pied Piper down whatever road they're taking.
No, I have always said, and unfortunately you haven't read my books and things, but...
Actually, I have.
Well, and I have made it very clear that there are two things that are equally dangerous. The deification of these visitors or the demonization of them. Each are equally dangerous, and I've said this since the early 90s.
And then we're in agreement, but what you said on stage was not that.
I didn't deify them, and I didn't demonize them. My point is that we're living in a universe together. We're going to have to live together in that universe.
Absolutely.
The solutions are not going to be name-calling and we're better than you are, and those are in service to self and those are the service to others, and this whole thing. Because I think that we have to look at this from a much larger picture, and that is not only Earth, but the whole cosmos is going through a quantum moment. It is not just an Earth moment, it's a universal moment.
Absolutely.
And the hallmark of which is universal peace. And the hallmark of which is good. And so it is also true that interstellar civilizations are not allowed to leave their biosphere until they have become in agreement for peace. Now, and...
Okay, that's an assumption.
This has been proven. Because if these...
No way. Nothing has been proven on this planet
if these civilizations...
on that degree of sophistication.
Well, if they were here,
no way.
If they were here and they were invading and they were hostile, they would not have waited for us to have the kind of weapons we have today. They would have absolutely shut this civilization down.
On the contrary, I mean, there's actually... We have to actually get into a whole sociopolitical look at what it is to be an ET spacefaring culture in search of planetoids or planets and building new environments, and then what you do with them. In a sense, you can actually take the Earth as a microcosm, and you can look at how did it go when we took over different continents here.
Yeah,
and what was the model, and then we get to space,
this
and
is
we
a
also
huge
have
problem.
to
You're engaging in an anthropocentric projection onto interstellar
as
civilization.
Above, so below.
Well,
in other
so in your
words,
belief, but I think that you're completely incorrect.
all I'm
in this.
saying is we're part of the universe, and that you can't eliminate, and there's no definitive decision on this part. You're making absolute statements.
Do you think our classified projects have traveled interstellar yet?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, they have not. Okay. Now,
we've got evidence that they have.
Well, I'd love to see you prove it, because but
we don't have evidence, but in May 2001 you said that we have superluminal capability.
Yes.
What are we doing? Going to Pluto with superluminal capability? It takes 5 seconds.
No, because they're not allowed to use it. Now, here's something that there is a quarantine on this planet until we become peaceful. And this is why, if you listen,
There's a philosophy
if
that
you
there's
look
a
at-
quarantine.
No, there is. And if you look at even what Neil
But
Armstrong said,
why? Because an ET
after-
told you? I mean, really, let's get down to it.
Well, let's get back there.
We're all in
Let's talk about what
communication
Neil
with different
Armstrong
races.
was heard saying. It's in Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret. You can read it.
Yep.
And I'm sure you have.
A mind-controlled
British.
astronaut is what you're talking about. You're going to give me testimony from a mind-controlled astronaut.
No,
Let's
but
hear where this goes. I'm
he
interested.
said that when we were basically warned off the moon, and that's why we didn't continue.
And I
to go.
believe these
And-
warnings exist.
and-
There has
and-
been evidence that we're warned off Mars because certain craft have never made it there, have been shot down, have been disappeared, have had technical problems that haven't
Well,
been
and
explained by NASA.
one can put a xenophobic spin on that, or one can say perhaps there's a wiser cosmic order that says that until a civilization reaches a certain amount of stability for the civilization and peace, they are not allowed to travel amongst the stars. That the entry ticket is peace. And I think that is the situation.
Okay, I understand that's your philosophy.
And no, it's not my philosophy. It's what the evidence. This is not how I started out. This is what I have found to be true from many different witness testimonies and the observation overall and aggregate.
But our witness
of the
testimony would contradict that.
Well, fine. I'd
So
like
what
to
do you
speak
do
to
with
them.
that? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe we'll have to compare notes because,
Yeah.
really, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
this is valuable. Because what happens is, for
Right.
better or worse, we're both out there. We're both investigating these questions, and they are open questions that actually
They are, but I think it's
the
rather unhelpful
information
if you go
hasn't
onto a
been-
blog and say that what I'm saying and doing is
It-
sinister. I think
I
that,
said-
I have never said anything harmful about you guys.
It's insidious. The reason
Insidious
it's
and this and that.
insidious
And I think that
is
this
because
is
it leaves
exactly the kind of
earth
thing. And I'm going to
vulnerable.
absolutely, you invited me to an interview. I'm going to
Sure.
provide an interview. If you want to overtalk everything I say, you can overtalk what I say.
You overtalk
But-
us.
But I am telling you that I'm being interviewed. And so the point is that if
It's mutual. See, you don't know this, and I'm sorry. We didn't have time to tell you our philosophy of how we conduct an interview, but I did kind of warn
okay,
you
so we want to have
that
a
we had
debate.
differences of
We
opinion.
have differences of opinion, and that's fine. But I think the most dangerous thing we can do is say everyone has partial information.
Right.
To start making sweeping judgments that are negative. And you can say, well, it's not negative, we're just saying that they're in service to self versus service to others, and couch it however you wish. But if we go down that path, we're already creating a new cosmological us versus them, which is the absolute recapitulation of the mistake on Earth for the last 10,000 years. I think we can do better than that. I think we have to learn to look at these things, and let's say that everything that your philosophy and how you're viewing this is correct. If it's 100% correct, I would still say the path of wisdom is education,
Absolutely.
elucidation, engagement peacefully,
Absolutely.
higher states of consciousness,
Yep.
all of this.
Yep.
I don't think it consists in characterizations, name calling, what have you. Now that goes on the diplomatic front and between nations on the earth. And I think we have to be very careful not to engage in that sort of anthropocentric projection of the current state of duality of the human condition on these visitors. I think it may be much more difficult to make those kinds of assessments. But if we go down that path, what we'll be doing is that we'll be dragging the baggage of the old era into this pivotal time, this embryonic time, where we're trying to transition to a new civilization, the hallmark of which will be universal peace. I don't think we're going to be going into a period of time of competing planetary systems having wars. And I think that this is, although that is the Scientological view and it's many of the eschatologists' view, I think that actually we're going to go through a quantum transformation that's global and interplanetary that will make this quite clear in the coming years, if not months. I think that time is getting very short for how much more time we're going to have before there's this large transformation. And I think the other thing is to say, I would say to people, if there is a civilization that is here for their own purely selfish interests and have not a shred of altruism or concern for humanity or Earth, those are the beings I would want to meet with first. And I have said this for years. Because you need a diplomatic initiative to North Korea and Iran and China more than you do to Great Britain, if you're an American, let's say.
Absolutely.
And so this
but
is
you can't be in denial of the
there's no
potentiality.
denial here. I'm not some sort of Pollyanna fool.
Well,
I mean, and that characterization of being in denial. I'm not in denial about anything. I'm just saying that.
Wait. You're personalizing this in a way that it's not personal. In other words, I'm saying what I said is I didn't direct it
Jan
to you.
can give me what you wrote on the blog, and I'll show you what you wrote on the blog.
Excuse me. I said that what you said on stage was insidious, and it's insidious because what it does is leave again humanity. Look, let's both agree
It's a
here.
real misdirect.
We are in love.
It's a real misdirect.
We both love
it's a misdirect.
humanity. We're both here to make sure that we make it through this next era.
Right.
Okay? And we can say we have a common goal in that sense.
Absolutely.
And when I say it's insidious, I'm not saying you personally are insidious. What I'm saying is what you're saying leads to an insidious state of affairs if people out there were to become disarmed and completely vulnerable and allow, like I said, ET to take over the sovereignty of the earth and of humanity
This is
to
not at all-
develop,
I've never
to
suggested
develop
that.
on its own. But there are implications to what you're saying when you say
your
all
implications.
ETs are good.
Your implications.
And we're
of
using
that.
the words good and bad. Let's be honest. We're using the words good and bad because we have to use language, and we're just using it in a simplistic way
Right.
to cover a very wide spectrum of what it means to be good philosophically and what it means to be bad philosophically. And we're not naive, and we're not looking at this in a black and white way. So let's not go
But I think
there.
we have to be very careful because that slips into that very quickly. That language slips into that paradigm
Sure.
very, very quickly.
And it could be misleading, and I appreciate that.
And I think it
but-
is misleading, but I think the other thing that it's also very dangerous. I think that I'm not at all suggesting that humans disarm. My whole message about humans empowering, not only in consciousness, but in organization and every other way. And moreover, you said that we need to be armed. Well, yeah, armed with what? And I think that.
Well, that's another
armed
discussion.
with what?
Let's talk. We can talk
Knowledge, but
that's
we're going to go.
spiritual.
We're going to.
I mean,
it is
knowledge,
spiritual,
absolutely.
and this is the chief
So
purpose of CC.
knowledge is to question constantly, and so what we're not positing is answers here, so much as let's keep exploring. And at no point do we decide that all, quote unquote, all ETs are good. Because suddenly we have a paradigm that says you cannot leave the planet beyond a certain point unless you believe in, quote, peace, and unless you have attained a certain level of civilization. That means that you are therefore good, all good, because and therefore better than humanity. There's sort of an implication under there.
And your alternative would be what? Conflict with the ones who aren't?
No, that's polarizing.
It's a
things in the way that we're
model
not.
of the
You're polarizing things.
universe.
So what's your answer then?
Multi-dimensions.
Okay.
What's your answer to these ones that are in service
It's
to
complex.
self?
It's more
No,
the ones that
complex.
you see.
No.
There are no limits. Go
Okay.
ahead.
My response to this is to agree with you that it's a very complex situation, and there may be alien agendas which we are not able to understand, just like the farmer can't understand what the farmer is doing or what the veterinary surgeon is doing. If you approach a wild animal because you want to give him some food, the wild animal is going to run away because he doesn't trust the human. There are all sorts of aspects to this that we may be very presumptuous in our ability to understand, but my point is that it's dangerous, and I'm not even saying it's a deliberate misdirect, but I do believe it was, personally, I believe it was a misdirect to lead people to believe, with the authority position that you have in the UFO community, that if anybody feels that that anything other than all ETs are friendly, then they're somehow working on the side of the Illuminati. That's a polarization that is not true, and we don't agree with that at all. We think that there's a big maybe category where for sure some
Absolutely.
ETs are friendly. I've met some of them personally. I don't even think that my abduction was ill-intended. I think that this was a program in some way for something which I'm doing now. You may have had a parallel experience. But I don't know what's happening. I'm willing to roll with that way because I don't think they intended any harm to me, but they sure as hell weren't military. That wasn't a MyLab operation.
No, but my point is, no, here's what I said.
But we don't know
My point is
these
that there's
things.
no
We don't know-
evidence
but-
that these
sorry.
visitors are hostile.
Give me 20
to
seconds,
us.
yeah. But we don't
Actually,
know.
there is
Hang on.
evidence.
We don't know. But neither do you. And you shouldn't say that you know when you don't. That's my point.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
actually,
let's get to the place where, the fact
no,
is.
but
I
I'm
want to hear
saying
Steve's
there is-
response to that,
no,
because
I-
he doesn't know, and you're presuming to know.
Exactly.
And you're capitalizing on your
No.
authoritative position in the UFO community, and that's irresponsible, because you're leading people who are feeding off your words, and you shouldn't do that.
No,
you
I
should
am
encourage people
totally
to
not
make up their own mind.
irresponsible. I'm trying to do this very responsibly.
Okay.
Because I know what's at stake if people are led into the path of panic and polarity and duality.
But we're not
This
doing
is-
that. And
Well,
we're acting in the
absolutely,
opposite
this
direction,
sort
saying
of-
don't worry about a damn thing.
No,
And that's
I'm not
equally
saying don't
bad.
worry. I'm saying
Okay.
Why not just
Let me
enlighten
tell you,
awareness?
can I answer any of this?
Do it, go on.
It's a 2-1-1.
I think you're answering it. I think you've been answering, but go ahead.
No, because you haven't heard my answer yet.
Go
My
on.
answer is, what I consistently say is that there's no evidence that they are hostile and that we have to be in a armed position, in a Star Wars SDI position, and that dealing with it in that way is the last thing that we should be doing.
I agree with that.
Okay.
Okay,
and
so you're
so
assuming
whether
that
or
we're
not you
making that
cannot,
jump.
let me
Wait a
I
minute.
finish.
Wait a minute.
I cannot say that there is, you can't prove a negative. I've said this 3 or 4 times. I can go with the evidence I've seen. Moreover, I can go with the experience of 19 years of thousands of people in CSETI expeditions and the experiences we've had with these visitors, none of which has been fearsome, negative, invasive, none of the sort. The other point that I have to make is that if it were true that there were civilizations that had self-interest and were going around the cosmos colonizing and invading different worlds or planetoids or what have you, then I would say that those are the civilizations we need to find a way to engage. And it isn't going to be down the barrel of a laser weapon or an electromagnetic pulse weapon.
True.
And so...
I think you're making a jump. I mean, I have to say
So
here,
let me
you're
fin- I
making
haven't
a
finished
jump
my answer yet.
to Star Wars from us just saying there may be ETs with self-interest guiding their
Well, but let's take a step back from humanity for a moment and look at this through the eyes. Let's say there is a civilization like you're describing. I mean, just,
What civilization are we describing?
the ones that you think are not in service to others.
We
but are
think
in
they may have
service to self.
agendas that are not necessarily in our interest. That's not a polarized position.
right.
Okay, and
That's the third
but let's say that's the case.
And it
Let's say
doesn't mean
that
we want to
they're-
shoot them in the head either.
Okay,
That's
but
a
let's
fact.
say that's true. I don't think it is true. Maybe I'm wrong. It's possible. I mean, I don't pretend to know everything, but maybe I'm wrong. But let's say that's true. What might have instigated that? Now, let's go back 100 years. We were in horse and buggies and rifles and things. And my grandmother, born in the late 1800s, post-Reconstruction South, saw her son design the lunar module, put the first man on the moon. And now her grandson doing what I'm doing. And we've gone from horse and buggies to the capacity for interstellar travel and anti-grav and dematerialization and trans-dimensional technologies, from gunpowder and the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. At the same time, we've gone from rifles and machine guns to thermonuclear weapons. And is it a coincidence that the sort of Pandora's box that opened when we started detonating thermonuclear weapons was because it was having an effect beyond just the Earth, transdimensionally? And is it possible that the trajectory they saw our civilization going on, these ones that you think may not have our best interests in heart, may have seen us going on a trajectory that if it continued on that trajectory would lead to us going into their neighborhood with weapons of mass destruction, with our unchecked simian tendency towards war making and what have you. And so I'm trying to say, let's look at this for just a moment through another perspective that's non-human, if we can. It's very difficult because we are human.
Look, I met with Robert Salas. He watched the craft fly over, okay, in Montana, the missile silos, and turn them off. I've talked with him in his house about these experiences, as you have
Right.
in your disclosure project, and we're totally on the same page on that. There's no doubt whatsoever that they came and they are absolutely adamant that
Right.
this technology not go, first of all, not happen on the Earth, but
there
second
was
of all,
destroy the planet.
not go beyond, and that it's actually interdimensional in its
Correct.
destructive
Yes, I'm very aware of this.
Yep.
And so,
So what kind of
I think we're
harness
in
did we
agreement
pick?
on that.
In other words, and therefore, what kind of provisions and things are going on as a consequence of that? And so I always say, everyone starts getting into, this alien agenda and that alien agenda, and I would say, what would be more constructive is that the human agenda be fixed.
Yeah.
That we learn to live on this planet and
No disagreement there.
fix our own home, create a peaceful civilization, rather than worrying about other motives from other civilizations. And here's what I predict. I predict that if we were to do that, and learn to live together without clubbing each other over the head and killing each other on this planet, and is so below, so above, that we would see a change perhaps in the cosmic order for that reason. So rather than engaging in debates and speculation about the agenda of perhaps harmful aliens and this and that, I would say, why don't we create a civilization of abundance and of peace and of enlightenment here, and go into space with that intent and see what the response to the cosmos will be then. Well, it may be the response that we're getting now is a directly proportional response, karmically and otherwise, to what we have been doing to each
We
other.
are attracting
in the last 100 years,
mirror.
we have killed 160 million of our own fellow humans. And I think that if you reflect on that, and I was seeing an interview with Robert McNamara towards the end of his life, where he was reflecting on the terrible mistakes he made in Vietnam and the other wars of the 20th century. And what I think is that there needs to be a sort of, let's look at ourselves. And I think that many
But
times...
let's not do that to the exclusion. It's not an either or question. In other words, what I hear you saying is let's be a little more sort of earth-centered in our view of reality and not worry about the agendas of those other beings out there. And let's concentrate on building our nest and making it a good, healthy place and playing nice with each other. And
No, it's not either or. I'm saying let's do that. That's why we're doing the Orion Project.
We have absolutely no disagreement with that.
That's why we're also doing the contact diplomatic effort. And we invite all these, we always invite all these civilizations
But actually,
to make
you're
contact.
assuming that there's no intervention going on. And I think this is getting to the root of the question. In other words, do you know about screen memories? Because you must know about them if you've been as deep as you have.
Well, yeah, the psychotronic programs that have been in existence
All right.
for many years. have
Because
that
you
capability.
obviously have a positive view of all your interactions. And, not to get personal on this level, but to say that if I meet a being who thinks they've only had positive interactions with certain ETs or animals or whoever they are, then I might look at that person and I might question, this is my issue. I might question whether or not that person really knows what they're having, because they might be screen memoried and they might actually be having some negative interaction in there and not know it. Now, obviously,
So you're
I'm not,
back to the positive and the negative and the polarity.
but we live in a 3D level, and we are
And see,
moving
this
to
is
the
the whole
4D.
point, is that
It's not actually, it goes beyond that, so don't interrupt me because I want to finish
I don't
here.
think it's that simple.
Absolutely, and we agree on that. It is very complex.
Right.
We are multidimensional beings. We live on lots of different levels. We are spiritual beings first and humans second, okay? We actually are just inhabiting these human bodies at the moment, in my view. Okay?
Short-term lease.
And I have had a number of samadhi experiences myself, so I totally know where you're coming from with that, and I appreciate that. But that doesn't change the fact that it is extremely complex, this picture of what's going on here. None of us have all the answers. And to make definitive statements that we feel you are making out there, okay, and to actually limit, to put blinders on to such an effect to say, there is nothing to be worried about at all, humans out there. Just worry about your own little playground. And meanwhile, out there are, because I got to tell you, if you're aware of psychic and you have psychic perception, you know there are entities that do not have bodies that are negatively oriented. Now, negative, again, becomes a judgment. And how do you want to call negative?
Those aren't extraterrestrial.
I could say...
Now you're confusing the whole cosmological...
I'm not confused. On the contrary,
Okay.
I'm using an example.
And I have never denied that there were those kind of entities.
Okay, fine, but I'm saying if you
But
want...
those aren't extraterrestrial.
I know
Physical
that, but I'm
some of this may be
extrapolate. Let's
Yeah.
extrapolate from there. I'm simply focusing right now on what you might term a negative entity, that it doesn't have a body, and I'm saying, or you could even say fire. Now, fire is an entity. It's a non. It doesn't have a body, and yet it has a power. It can create itself. So, in a sense, you could say it's negatively oriented if it burns your house, but on the other hand, it could keep you warm. So by the same token, we could find entities that are in physical bodies, again, spirits having a physical experience, which could be an ET, it could be us. It's so multidimensional. Don't you see what I'm saying? In other words, if they are spirits as we are spirits,
Sure.
then they can be moved by the positive polarity as they could be pulled by the negative polarity, and it could look from the dimension of being in this 3D world that we're inhabiting called Earth, in this human body, in this experience, and how they impact us could in fact be ultimately negative to our growth cycle. And that is in fact something that has been posited as a very real possibility.
Well, anything is possible. I mean, obviously, I just don't see the evidence for that. I do see the evidence for humans killing each other. I do see weapons in space where we have targeted these visitors.
I appreciate that.
And all of that. So, I mean, we can talk in circles all day on this.
Sure.
My position is that there has not been an action against the Earth and humanity from an extraterrestrial, interstellar, physical civilization to here that I think would cause us to want to have a sort of armed conflict response. Now, are there experiences people have had that they interpret as negative? Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you something, and people don't like to hear this, but in a major trauma case, if a child comes in, and there's no time for anesthesia, and I have to put a chest tube in the chest wall of that child, I must look like the most horrible monster and devil that ever lived. My motive is to save that child. My motive is to help that child. But to anyone seeing it who would just walk in from another planet or off the street, they go, what is that monstrous doctor? What are they doing?
What's he doing to that
And what
life?
my motive is that I've got 5 minutes or less to save that child's life. And so all I'm saying is that the sort of
It's a matter of
anthropocentric perspective, and it is a matter of perspective, and I think that's why I prefer to be cautiously optimistic, put out a positive view on how we should be interacting with this thing. It is not irresponsible. I am not insidious. And I think that these sort of characterizations are highly offensive, as I have never attacked you folks publicly. I found I was attacked on your blog today. It was unfortunate. But my perspective, I want to be very clear.
No, your philosophy was attacked. You were not attacked.
Yeah, well, whatever.
Actually, you were complimented.
But I just have to say that is why we're wanting to be cautious, because it is so easy for humans. I mean, look what happened after 9/11. I mean, it is so easy for humans to take shreds of information and then go on a war footing or go on a conflict footing.
We agree with
and
you.
this
But
is the inherent danger. This is the inherent danger of some of the things that you're saying.
Yeah,
is that it can shove humanity. Okay, and there's one thing that, to have a private conversation about speculating about the motives and the agendas of the aliens, but when you start talking to the people of the planet about this, and you start putting out and positing that there are these and to use your word, in the polarity, negative and this and that, this would throw the planet into, and it would also throw the planet completely into the camp of Majestic, who for years has been trying to, and has also taken presidents aside like Reagan, and tried to convince them of exactly the argument you're making, so that he would spend hundreds of billions of dollars on SDI. And I think this gets into serious policy issues. Okay, and I think I have responsibilities here that you're not aware of. So to say I'm irresponsible, you don't know what my responsibilities are. And therefore, no, you do not. And so what I'm saying here is that
I want to ask a question, which is very. I want to take this back. Now, just wait a second. Let's cool down. And I want to just make an analogy. Now, an analogy that I sometimes use, and it usually results in nods of agreement, is that we're like fishermen on a South Sea island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, having believed for generations that we're the only people in the whole world. And we're sitting around a campfire cooking our fish. And we're trying to figure out that big metal ship on the horizon. What do they want with us? That metal bird that keeps on circling around our island. What are they doing? And is it real? And did you see it? And all this kind of stuff. And we're trying to figure out the intentions, assuming that we believe in their existence, of these other beings that we're suddenly starting to realize might exist in our universe on this little tropical island. Now, the problem is that if we really do look at this as a human situation, which is quite real, really, what experience do we have as South Sea Island fishermen to figure out maybe they want to cut our trees down, maybe they want to save us because the sea level is rising and they want to take us to another island, maybe they want our minerals, or maybe they want to convert us to Christianity, maybe they want to eat us, kill us, or maybe they want to make friends. And how do we know? And the danger is, and this is a question now, the danger is that I'm here around this campfire with you guys, and I hear you saying those other men in those big ships and those metal birds must be friendly. And I'm saying, wait a minute, we need to be a little bit careful here, because actually, you know, even though we do get into fights on this little island every now and then, how do we know we can trust them? Maybe we can, maybe we can't. What's your experience? That's an attempt to characterize by analogy how complex this is. That's why I said that it was irresponsible, as I would do if I was around that campfire, as an elder of this community, saying, they've got to be friendly, we've got to trust them, we've got to trust them, we've got to trust them. This is what the Spanish said to the conquistadores.
Yes, but your metaphor is, again, an anthropocentric projection onto something that I think is non-applicable. And I think that in addition to that, I keep coming back to this, not only my personal experience, but the experience of hundreds of people, thousands of people that we have had involved with our diplomatic contact programs have not had any of these sort of experiences that would lend us to believe that there are civilizations that are hostile to the earth and to humanity. On the other hand, I have had many sources describe to me the program life forms, the military involvement with hoaxing abductions, a false flag operation to create an alien threat that we can unite against. So I have to go on the knowledge and the experience I have, and it isn't just observing something at afar, because we've actually had contact, and we've actually have more information than something just floating up above the island. So the analogy breaks down very quickly, and even if there was this potential for one or more of these planetary civilizations to be of concern to us, my answer would still be the same. There needs to be engagement. There needs to be a diplomatic détente. There needs to be a rapprochement. There needs to be an enlightened approach to this, where we really move out of a sort of duality that leads to conflict on Earth. I think that regardless of what your assessment of the agenda, the path of wisdom and safety is that. Because
we don't disagree with that, okay?
I agree fully.
Let's talk about
and it needs
where
to be
we
in the
agree.
public domain.
Yeah,
Okay,
right. So
you know, I mean, we certainly agree on the end objective, okay? The end objective from our point of view, okay? We are not part of the military-industrial complex, okay? We're doing what we do because we believe in truth, because we're dedicating our lives, and indeed our lives literally have been in danger because of what we believe, and we do it on a daily basis, and you of all people should understand this. So we're not taking this lightly, and our end result is not to be what they may desire as their ultimate end game. In other words, we're not here to support their end game, and we're not naive about what we're doing either. So neither of those things is true. Okay, we are not trying to promote a sort of a fear-based paradigm such that people get into a place where the only thing they can think of is to shoot ET in the head, to be graphic, or to, allow for space-based weaponry. I mean, we, basically agree with your philosophy in that way wholeheartedly. And in fact, I would say we are dedicating our lives to that. However, on the other hand, we are also not going to sit here and pretend that we know all the answers. And we're also not going to assume that all contact is positive. And on the contrary to what
you're free to assume whatever you
yeah, obviously we are. Yeah. But in terms of this discussion, and for the reason that we, you're sort of saying our blog thing, our posting was you found offensive because we're saying what you're saying on stage, and again, you're on stage actually more often than we are, far more often. And I have to say, therefore, your responsibility is great. And perhaps your approach is a bit simplistic in that you are assuming that if you talk about the potential, that there are other things going on or potential for other ways of looking at the question, that the jump that the whole audience out there is going to make immediately is to fear and panic, and that they're going to jump on this bandwagon of the military-industrial complex and all go out and grab their guns and knives and want to go shoot ET and fight with each other and other worlds and so on. That's not.
The problem is that
in other words, you're going.
I'm acutely aware that my position is the minority position. Okay. I'm acutely aware
actually,
that...
that's not true either.
And that...
I mean, there are plenty of people out there that are advocating peace and love and getting on their cars and jumping up and down, please, ET, come save us because you're all good.
No, I would actually, I would challenge you to look at Hollywood, the UFO community, the books and videos that are out on this subject. They are overwhelmingly negative and terrifying. And I think that this is one of the problems, is that I think that one of the problems is that we have to look at this with a long view. And the long view, as I see it, and this is all I can do is go by my own moral compass and what I think is right. I don't think I'm irresponsible, I don't think I'm simplistic and all these sort of characterizations. I think that I have a responsibility to help articulate a path forward that is wise and that does not redound to further fear and panic and negativity on this planet, but that moves us forward in a positive way and that can lead to what I am certain will be the future for this planet. And that's one of not only world peace, but universal peace, and a wholly, completely new transformative civilization on this planet that isn't thousands of years off or even decades off now. I think it's very, very near. And so I think that that's what I wish to articulate. And there's no simplicity to it. It's actually a rather complex concept. And it's also a way of engaging spiritually. I want to share a dream I had. I don't share this very often, but back when my friend Sherry and I and another member of my team all got metastatic cancer at the same month, and we were all going to die. She died. But she was still alive. And Bill Colby had died, been killed, trying to help us just before this. And it was a terrible time, actually, for me. And I had a dream. And of course, I'm human. I was angry. I was mad as hell at what was happening to us. And I had a dream. I think I was in England doing some crop circle work. And in the dream, there were these giant lions that were stalking me. And they were going to try to kill me. And it's funny because Dr. Tom Beard talks about the lions of this cabal, and I'd never heard him use that term at the time I had the dream, but here were these huge lions, and they were stalking me and they were going to kill me. And it was this lucid, full-color dream. And I didn't run. I didn't get angry. I didn't have hate in my heart. I opened my heart and went to a place of universal love and consciousness, and I engaged each lion in their eyes. And we were doing this, following each other around. And eventually, they became so engaged with that energy that even though they had huge claws and fangs, they actually flipped over on their back. And I was petting them like this, like they were big pussycats. And we, had become completely diffused that situation. I use that as an analogy of a sort of an aikido, spiritually, of the engagement I'm endeavoring in, both with the public, with Majestic, with the visitors, and that's what I'm doing.
I understand.
And that's it in summary.
And I think that's a great. I think that's a great description of of your approach and what's motivating you. And thank you very much for that.
Thank you for sharing
Thank
that,
you.
Stephen. Thank
Stephen
you.
Greer.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take
Appreciate
it.
it. Thank you.